$60 billion high-speed rail project could be a game changer for logistics. The 4,000-kilometer network will connect major cities like Lagos, Abuja, Kano, and Port Harcourt, operating at 200 to 250 kilometers per hour. This ambitious project, financed by China, aims to transform the nation's economic landscape by reducing travel times and creating integrated logistics corridors. Achieving ridership targets and currency stability are crucial for the project's long-term viability, with annual debt servicing costs to be between $3 to $4 billion. Soji Apampa, co-founder and CEO of the Convention on Business Integrity in Nigeria, is chair of the Ethics and Governance Committee of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and incoming co-chair, that's non-state actors of the Open Government Partnership Nigeria. And he comments on the rail project and some of the related issues.
So it's very flawed argument for anyone to suggest that perhaps in this sort of large construction, we shouldn't aim to prevent corruption. So what should we do then to prevent this corruption? The first is that we need to prevent corruption even in the origination of the project. We need to make sure that the routes chosen for the bullet train are the ones that will spark off indeed economic growth. We need to also ensure that we are not paying above the odds and that it is going to result in value for money, good value for money, and that the project, once started, that we can actually afford to complete the project. I know we're borrowing the money from China, and it's not China's problem what we do with the money when we receive it. So it is for us as Nigerians to be concerned about what is being pledged in return for these loans that are being taken. The port of Djibouti didn't suddenly come under Chinese control. There was something that Djibouti borrowed money for and did not perform before the port of Djibouti then fell to the Chinese. So what exactly are we going to pledge in exchange for $60 billion? I think this really requires a national scale discussion and debate. And all well-meaning Nigerians should be concerned about the details of such an investment at this time. So yes, it is a good idea to open up with great infrastructure projects, but there are well laid down principles, tested principles of project anti-corruption strategies. Global Anti-Corruption Infrastructure Anti-Corruption Center talks about some 15 project anti-corruption principles, and these principles range from things like anti-corruption management of the project to project selection, design, and acquisition standards, how the procurement is actually done, contract provisions, contract management, financial management, things like controls for major suppliers and sub-suppliers, project code of conduct, the training that is given to the participants, the kind of issues around government permits, independent monitoring of the project, independent auditing of the project, reporting and investigation, enforcement, and transparency. Of course, with a procurement of this size and nature, $60 billion, it is necessary to make sure that from the start, there is public oversight over the project. And that secondly, the procurement is transparent and fair. Now, this is where Nigerians will be very concerned about the role that the Bureau for Public Procurement is going to play in this, because we've seen that large projects could be let even without some of these procedures being followed. So let's encourage the government that in making the 60 billion procurement, that some of those principles are followed and that there is proper engagement and transparency around it, particularly in the selection of the contractors and subcontractors that would be on the project. And also the principle that as much as possible, Nigerian entities should be the ones who are providing services. And even when things are imported from outside the country, that we still get local actors backstopping those operations so we can maintain what it is that we're procuring with $60 billion.
Hello, welcome to Global Business Insights, where we go deeper into the main business stories and unravel today's more complex and dynamic context. The Jackson Hole rally fizzled out, that's in the US on Monday, even as the stock market braced for Nvidia earnings coming out later today. Nvidia's business in China will be the focus of investors when the AI chip maker reports. Markets also are awaiting the United States Personal Consumption Expenditure Index. That's the Fed's gauge of inflation coming out on Friday to see if the read will reinforce Powell's dovish pivot. Markets may be seeing also the latest move to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook for alleged mortgage fraud as yet another signal of denting the independence of the Reserve Bank, even as this sets the stage for a legal battle. Powell may so far be treating this as noise, and the Fed has only said it will simply abide by the court decision. Governor Cook had said she cannot be fired and will respond vigorously to allegations of wrongdoing. The gap between long and short-term yield was close to its widest in 3 years as investors bet that erosion of independence will lead to lower rates in the short term, but higher rates in the future, as Fed officials are compelled to tighten to fight higher future inflation. Still, the S&P 500 ended higher yesterday, helped by Nvidia and Eli Lilly, while Trump's decision to fire Central Bank Governor Cook heightened concerns about the Reserve Bank's independence. In the US, new orders for key US manufactured capital goods increased more than expected in July, signaling a strong start to business spending on equipment in Q3. Non-defense capital goods orders, excluding aircraft, rose 1.1% last month after a revised 0.6% decline in June. Also, U.S. consumer sentiment measured by August Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index eased slightly to 97.4 from a revised 98.7, snapping the previous recovery. Still in the U.S., Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says the government could take stakes in American defense contractors like, say, Lockheed Martin, which makes 97% of revenue from the U.S. government. And earlier we had heard of a 10% government stake in Intel's, converting grants to equity and providing additional investment support. Government stake of a temporary nature can help an ailing organization struggling in the markets, especially where there is significance from a strategic perspective. But it does raise all sorts of governance-related risks, as well as making companies more vulnerable to the geopolitics, and certainly should not be the new normal. Also, some good news from Europe. The headline German IFO Business Climate Index rose to 89 in August from 88.6 in July, beating market forecast. But the German Current Economic Assessment Index inched down to 86.4 during the same period from 86.5 in July, missing 86.7 expected. The IFO expectations index, which indicates projections for the next 6 months, also jumped to 91.6 in August compared to July's 90.7. And in the UK, grocery price inflation edged up to 4.2% in August from 4% in July, also the highest level since February 2024. July headline inflation in the UK was up 3.8%, much in line with the Bank of England expectations. The Apex Bank projects a further uptick in September, but analysts are noting that UK inflation is rising at a time when Eurozone inflation seems to be trending down, having fallen from 2.4% in December to 2% in July. Critics are saying that higher UK inflation can be mostly explained by increases in prices that are influenced by the government. For example, in April, a 26% increase in water bills was imposed to fund increased investment in the sector. Also, in July, rents were up 4.5%, well above Eurozone's 2.9%. In addition, a 6.7% rise in the minimum wage, the increase in the rate of employers' national insurance, and the fall of the pound against the euro, all these are all contributing to further price pressures. Chancellor Rachel Reeves must see that the Bank of England may have to hold on further easing if pay inflation is not contained, and should we see more measures said to be on the way to expand taxes, driving up prices. Is the pot calling the kettle black, as Elon Musk's artificial intelligence startup XAI sued Apple and the maker of ChatGPT, OpenAI, for acting like monopolists? Apple recently announced a deeper partnership with OpenAI that embeds ChatGPT into its devices and programming tools, thus locking out other innovators. Last year, Musk had sued OpenAI for deceiving investors into thinking it would run a non-profit model. President Bola Tinubu told a news conference that Brazil's state-run oil company Petrobras, which left Nigeria 5 years ago, should be able to return quickly. Petrobras started operations in Nigeria in 1998 in the deep waters off the Niger Delta, later selling its stake over 10 years ago to raise cash for domestic projects. Also in the oil sector, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission has said that Nigeria's oil output recorded yet another significant leap in July 2024, averaging 1.71 million barrels per day. This comes to a 9.9% year-on-year surge from the 1.56 million barrels per day produced in July 2024. Nigeria's state oil firm NNPC Limited also said on Monday that nearly all pipeline theft has been eliminated after coordinated efforts by the country's defense and intelligence agencies.
Asia Pacific stock markets closed mixed as investors assessed the latest China industrial profits data. In China, industrial profits slipped 1.5% from a year earlier in July, marking a notable recovery following months of steeper declines. Also, this time in India, secondary US tariffs of 25% on shipments kicked in, pushing overall duties on India's exports to 50%. Global markets are focused on the second quarter earnings release from artificial intelligence and big tech bellwether Nvidia coming out later today. Also, oil prices steadied after falling in the previous session as investors watched fresh developments in the Ukraine war. Brent crude futures fell 9 cents to $67.13 per barrel. That was an early morning trade, while West Texas Intermediate crude futures were also down to $63 per barrel.
Well, that's all you can take on this episode of Global Business Insights. This is Bode Oshosami. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.